Tonight, the John Ankerberg Show is coming to you from Dallas, Texas, where we will present an extraordinarily crucial debate between a liberal Episcopal bishop and a conservative evangelical scholar. They will debate the controversial issues of premarital sex and homosexuality. Should the church condemn or condone such behavior? John's guests are the controversial Episcopal Bishop of Newark, New Jersey, Bishop John Spong, as well as the late Dr. Walter Martin, founder of the Christian Research Institute. In this edition of John Ankerberg, they will both address the question of whether or not Jesus is God and has the authority to command us concerning sexual ethics.
The simplistic claim that Jesus is God is not affirmed in Scripture.
The Scriptures say, not simplistically, but clearly, Jesus is God the Son, very clearly.
By that I mean that when Jesus was the incarnate one, he prayed to God. He was not talking to himself. He had the sense of God beyond himself.
I think what we're dealing with is what has been called theobabble. The bishop makes a statement, clear-cut, Jesus is not God, a simplistic idea. Then when asked about it, the bishop says, but actually that's not what I meant.
We invite you to stay tuned to hear this important debate.
Welcome. We're glad that you joined us, and we're here in Dallas, Texas, bringing you this debate. And tonight my guests are Bishop John Spong, the very controversial Episcopalian bishop from Newark, New Jersey. And he's representing the new morality, as he states, and calling for sexual ethics which fall outside what is believed to be the traditional moral norm. And on the other side is Dr. Walter Martin, who is representing historic Orthodox Christianity and traditional Christian ethics. And tonight, gentlemen, I'm glad that you're both here. And Bishop Spong, I want to come to you, and because television is so brief, and we have to get right down to the point, I hope you'll pardon me if I give you one of the toughest questions right at the beginning. But we're friends, and I enjoy your friendship, and sometimes friends can disagree. And so let's start with a tough one, but notice that I'm trying to couch it in the best terms I possibly can, okay? I've read your books, and in reading your books lately, I think that the question that many people that are Christians across the country would want me to ask first off, as they've heard you on television, as they've read your books, and as they've heard what you've said in print in the newspapers, you deny that Jesus is God. You deny the Bible is the literal Word of God. You deny the biblical definition of sin. You reject the biblical teaching on salvation that a person must believe in.
So, what do Pat Robertson and Bishop John Shelby Spong have in common? Pretty much nothing. Everything that the good bishop endorses, Pat Robertson thinks is evil and of the devil, and everything that Pat Robertson associates with Christianity, Bishop Spong wants to move beyond. The two are as radically opposed as you can imagine. So what do the two share in common? Both use the name Christian to describe themselves. If that isn't a problem, I don't know what is. In fact, it was Holy Week when a liberal Christian website called Religion Dispatches said we should get rid of the term altogether. It just doesn't have any meaning any longer. So here's my challenge. Dear Bishop, if you don't mind, I'll call you John. Dear Pat, I'd like to invite both of you to a single event. Let's do it in Pat's territory, Raleigh, North Carolina in early September. And let's call it Big Tent Christianity. We're holding a nationwide meeting, and we want to invite the two of you to come together to be a part of a Christianity broad enough to embrace both of you. If you think that you shouldn't come, then maybe you should both admit that the word Christian no longer has any meaning whatsoever. Sort of like Northern California and Southern California. Maybe the two sides should secede from each other and just go their own ways. In fact, let me go one step further. I'd like to make this appeal on the Colbert Report. So let me say, Stephen, why don't you let me invite these two gentlemen from an interview in your show to come together under a single tent and embrace each other through that one thing you share in common, Christianity. And if there's nothing left in common for the term anymore, let's just grant that it's like the two sides of the aisle in D.C. You're on the one side or the other, and never the twain shall meet. If Christianity is finished, let's be honest about it. If it's not, then join my friends and me as we host this Big Tent Christianity event in September. We'll invite both of you on the stage together. You can do your hug in public.
Suppose we change our God definition. Suppose we take God out of the sky and strip God of the supernatural power which we have created and placed upon this divine being. And suppose we begin to think of God as a presence at the very heart of life. We have to use words, so I use these words without any sense of investing them with more than their meaning will bear. If God is the source of life, as I believe God is, then God is present in all living things. God is present in you, in me, and in the whole created order. And if God is the source of life, then the only way you worship God is by living fully, sharing life, giving life away, not being afraid, wandering out of the certain into the uncertain, out of the known into the unknown. If God is the source of love, as I believe God is, then the only way you can worship God is by loving. Not by being right, but by loving. By loving wastefully. The image in my mind is an old sink in the basement that you plug up the drains and you turn on all the faucets and the water overflows the boundaries and goes all over the floor and fills up every crack and cranny, every dirty little space, and never stops to ask whether that crack deserves this living water, whether that crack deserves this love. You love because love is what you have to do, not because somebody deserves the love. You love wastefully. If God is the ground of being, as I believe God is, then the only way you and I can worship God is by having the courage to be all that we can be in the infinite variety of our humanity, whether we are male or female, gay or straight, transgender or bisexual, white or black or yellow or brown, left-handed or right-handed, brilliant or not quite so brilliant. No matter what the human difference is, you have something to offer in your own being. Nobody else can offer what you have to offer. And the only way you can worship God is by daring to be all that you can be and not be bound by the fears of yesterday. Yes, sir.
Bishop, I certainly appreciate your being here. It's a very compelling address. It seems that one of the ways that Christianity, at least organized Christianity, must change is with its relations to other faiths and other faith traditions. What are your thoughts about interfaith relations and religious pluralism?
The great sin of every religion is that it claims it has the whole truth. And we all do that. And the moment we do that, we begin to persecute anybody who disagrees with us. And I think that it gets silly when, does Christianity have the whole truth? Well, a lot of Christians say they do, but then when you say, well, is it Protestant or Catholics that really have the whole truth? Then they say, well, I don't know about that. I'm not sure about those people who are different from me. And then you break it down a little more. Is it Methodists or Baptists that have the whole truth? Or is it Pentecostals or whatever? And it begins to be silly. I don't think God's a Christian. I'm a Christian. Christianity to me is a human system that we have devised to enable us to walk through our experience into the mystery and wonder of God. But if we walk far enough and deeply enough, we go beyond the boundaries of any human religion. So I walk the Christ path. I have no problems with that. I was raised as a child of the West. My entry into God is through the doorway presented to me in the person of Jesus of Nazareth. I walk that doorway, through that doorway. But I think I've got a responsibility to walk so deeply into Christianity that I transcend its limits. And I believe the Jews have the same responsibility. and the Muslims and the Buddhists and the Hindus and anybody else you want to put in that equation. I want a Hindu to be deeply a Hindu, and a Buddhist to be deeply a Buddhist, and a Jew to be deeply a Jew, and an Islamic person, a Muslim, to be deeply Islamic. And I want them to go into their sacred tradition so deeply that they transcend all of their limits as they walk into the mystery of God. And when we have transcended our limits, when we've broken through the boundaries of human religion, sort of on the other side in the mystery, then I want us to sit down together, the Jew and the Buddhist and the Hindu and the Muslim and the Christian, and I want us to say, I as a Christian have walked the Christ path, and this is the pearl of great price that I've gained from walking the Christ path, and I want to share it with you. And the Muslim and the Jew and the Buddhist and the Hindu would say, and this is the pearl of great price that I've gained from walking the Buddhist path or the Hindu path, and I want to share it with you. And then each of us can be enriched by the journeys of other people, and none of us has to sacrifice our own treasure. And that's my vision of an interfaith world and an interfaith dialogue. Now, we have come a long way from the days when we sent out missionaries to convert the heathen. Now, there's hardly a missionary today except in evangelical Christianity that goes out to convert the heathen anymore. We go out to live with people, to learn from them, to share our story as we listen to their story. And we don't play that game, I'm okay, you're not okay, and you're not going to be okay until you believe just like I believe. That's pretty hostile. And I don't believe you can ever communicate the love of God by being hostile. And so I think we've had a lot of bad history. And we live in that bad history. Protestants and Catholics still kill each other in Ireland. Sunnis and Shia still kill each other in Iraq. Muslims and Hindus still kill each other in Bangladesh. Religion has not always brought about life and love and peace and wholeness. It's brought about murder and war and torture and inquisitions. And I think we've got to get beyond that. I worry anytime somebody tries to validate their religion by putting another religion down. And Christianity has been bad about that. We hated the Jews for years. There's not a Christian nation in Europe that the Jewish people were not either ghettoized or expelled from that nation at some point in their history. And we stood by and watched the Holocaust with benign neglect. Pius XII did nothing. The German Evangelical Lutheran Church was actually co-opted by the Nazis. The Christian countries, or at least they thought of themselves as Christian countries, Canada, the United States, and Great Britain, would not even bomb the railroad lines that led to Bergen-Belsen and Auschwitz. We're all guilty, and that's been going on forever. Martin Luther, the great reformer, was deeply anti-Semitic. He favored burning of synagogues. We've got a lot of bad history. When we got tired of persecuting the Jews, we took it out on the Muslims. That's what the Crusades are about. 11th, 12th, and 13th century. In the name of the one true God and organized by the Vatican, we went to the Holy Land to kill the infidels. Tell me, how different is that from 9/11? When religious nuts who happened to be Muslims, in the name of what they believed was the one true God, flew their planes into the World Trade Center to kill infidels. I mean, why don't we see that what we did in the past is what we were receiving? It doesn't make it good or right, but it helps us to understand that hostility is not forgotten, and you reap the whirlwind of your own hostility over the centuries. And then when we got tired of persecuting Muslims, we decided to persecute anybody who didn't believe the proper way. We call that the Inquisition. We burned a lot of people at the stake. We have a pretty bad record. And then we dehumanized people of color. The Pope has owned slaves. The Christian South participated in slavery. The Christians of South Africa participated in apartheid. We've got a lot of bad stuff. And homosexuals are the victim of the Christian church today. Let me just say a word about that, because everybody talks about that issue. There's not a shred of evidence that I know of that homosexual people choose to be homosexual because they're either mentally sick or morally depraved. Not a shred of evidence to support that, scientifically or medically. I didn't choose to be heterosexual. Did you? I just woke up when I was about 12 years old, and suddenly girls didn't seem obnoxious to me any longer. I certainly didn't sit on the side of the bed and say, I'll decide to be heterosexual. And I can't imagine anybody saying, I'll decide to be homosexual. I like to be disowned by my family and beat up by my friends and fired from my job and condemned by my church and run out of town. People don't choose their sexual orientation anymore. You choose to be men or women or white or black or left-handed or right-handed. And the sooner we get over trying to treat homosexual people as if they're abnormal, they're not abnormal, they are minority. That's a difference. In the higher mammals, we know that homosexual activity goes on. It's part, I don't understand it, but it's part of the way life is. We used to persecute left-handed people because they were abnormal. Then we learned that Andy Pettitte can throw a curveball that can strike out any Boston Red Sox. And we began to appreciate the virtue of being left-handed. So, it's just a matter of getting over. Just remember this. Anytime you denigrate another human being, you've also destroyed your own humanity. If you want to be whole, you cannot build your wholeness on the basis of tearing somebody else's wholeness down. And if that's controversial, make the most of it. I'm tired of that debate. It's over as far as I'm concerned, and I'm embarrassed.
You and I live on the other side of Copernicus and Kepler and Galileo. We know something about the vastness of space. We know the Earth is not the center of the universe. We know the Earth is not even the center of our galaxy. Our little sun is about 2/3 of the way out on the Milky Way. The sun does not rotate around the Earth. All biblical stories that assume that, like God sending manna from the sky on the Israelites, or building the Tower of Babel so tall it could reach up to heaven, or Jesus ascending into the sky to return to God. Those don't translate into the world in which we live. And so it's very difficult. If we freeze those concepts, it's very difficult for people with 21st century minds to continue to take the God they run into in church very seriously as a real force in the world. And so I see Christianity dying all over the world. Europe is a disaster area for religion, for organized religion. And it has been for a long time. In the United States, we're still a little more religiously oriented, particularly in the South. We're not that way in the metropolitan New York area on the West Coast. But those are the parts of the country that are more interactive with the world. The deeper you get into the South, the less there is outreach to the vast varieties. And so we do things like burn Korans and get all upset about a Muslim chapel in New York City, and those are all representations of tribal religion. So what I'm trying to do is to say, can we rethink the image of God in the 21st century? Can we rethink the life of Jesus in the 21st century? The life of Jesus, the way we tell the life of Jesus is that he is the external God from above the sky who came into this world and lived for 30 years and then went back to God. We sort of give him a round-trip ticket. We give him a landing field to get in. That's called the virgin birth. We give him a launching pad to get out. That's called the cosmic ascension. And we endow him with supernatural, miraculous power while he's here so that he can still the storm and walk on water and feed 5,000 people with 5 little loaves of bread. And he can raise people from the dead. And we think we act as if that still translates into the world that we live in, and it really doesn't. And so what we have going on in the Christian world today is that either you're a fundamentalist, you've given up the modern world, you've retreated into the religious patterns of yesterday, and you revivify them with great anxiety and zeal and hostility, I might add. And that's growing, because that offers people an answer and security. And the other side, which is growing even larger, is what I call the Church Alumni Association. That is, people are just dropping out of organized religion by droves, especially in your generation. And because it doesn't make sense, not because they hate God, it just doesn't make any sense. And when you look at what's going on in the organized Christian church today, it's almost pathetic because the only thing we really debate are sexual issues about which we know almost nothing. You know, we debate whether women are fully human, whether they can be ordained. We debate whether a woman has some responsibility over her own body or whether she's got to be a broodmare. We debate whether gay and lesbian people are fully human or ought to be given full rights and citizenships of church and state. And we don't know much about those things. We're an institution that required celibacy for leadership in our church for years and years and years, and we've treated women as if they're second-class citizens forever, not created in the image of God, not capable of being ordained. And we've treated homosexual people as if they're either mentally sick or morally depraved, neither of which I think are accurate or true. And so when people listen to the church debate these things, and they act as if they can solve them by quoting the Bible, well, I can quote the Bible to prove almost anything.
The Hindus, they have as many variations of Hindus as we have variations of Christians. We call them denominations. But Hindus don't quite get that formal, but their variations are as extreme as ours. You have some simple-minded Indian folk who are not educated and who are illiterate, for whom their Hindu religion is manipulative and superstitious to a fault. And you've got everything from that all the way up to these incredibly abstract, brilliant thinking Hindu philosophers. The one thing that's missing in the Hindu tradition that is so present in Christianity is their willingness to judge other people as inadequate. The Hindu believes that the Hindu philosopher would look at this superstitious, manipulative, religious, illiterate Hindu and would say, not that that person's wrong or ignorant or inept. They would say that person is responding to as much of God as they can experience. They are embracing as much of God as their consciousness in its present state of development would enable them to embrace. So you rejoice in their religious outlook. And if you do anything to change it, it's not to challenge them on the content level. It's to enter into a relationship that has the potential for raising their level of consciousness so that they can embrace a bigger picture of the truth. Now, I'd like to see more of that attitude be in the Christian church, in our various, we have religious wars instead, and we burn people at the stake, and we assign people to hell, or we write letters saying that you're the devil incarnate and I hope God strikes you dead because you disagree with my point of view. I think we have got a lot to learn from the Hindu people on that point.
These leaders seem not to recognize that there is no reputable scientific data in the world today that suggests that anybody is morally culpable for being gay, that anybody chooses their sexual orientation. We just awaken to who we are. We don't choose. How many of those of you in this audience who are heterosexual remember the day you chose to be heterosexual? I didn't choose to be heterosexual. I just woke up one morning when I was somewhere between 12 and 13, and suddenly girls didn't seem obnoxious to me any longer. I didn't know what happened to bring that change about, but I know I began to do some strange things like comb my hair and take baths a little more frequently and use deodorant. I'd never used deodorant up until that moment, but I would have done anything to get female attention. And if somebody had said to me, "Oh, you must be heterosexual," I would have said, "I don't know what that word means." See, we didn't have homosexuals in the South, so we didn't know what a heterosexual was. And my church taught me that homosexual people were either mentally sick, so they ought to be cured. Michelle O'Bachman's husband still practices that strange kind of medicine. And if they were not mentally sick, they had to be morally depraved because they chose an evil lifestyle. And guess what? They quoted the Bible to prove it. Now that took some work. They quoted Leviticus. You'd be surprised how many times people write me and say, "Have you not read Leviticus?" Well, I've read Leviticus more times than they know, and I've read the rest of the Bible too. Leviticus 18 says that homosexuals are an abomination, and Leviticus 20 says they ought to be put to death. But before you go quoting that, you better look at some of the other parts of the Bible. In the book of Deuteronomy, it says that if a child is willfully disobedient to his or her parents and talks back to his or her parents, they ought to be put to death. Raise your hands, how many of you would still be alive? The book of Leviticus says if you commit adultery, you shall be put to death, but I will not ask you to raise your hands if you would still be alive. It says if you worship a false god, you shall be put to death, but who's going to tell you who the true God is? And one of my favorites that I don't suspect many people know because I've never heard it preached about, in Leviticus 20 it says you shall be put to death if you have sex with your mother-in-law. How many of you ever heard a sermon on that topic? People aren't going to preach about what most people can't imagine doing. And the reason you laughed is you just tried to imagine it. Be careful before you start quoting the Bible literally.
I want to say just a word about the church's dishonesty in the way we've treated gay and lesbian people throughout the ages. We've always been willing to receive their gifts, so long as they were dishonest about who they were. There's no virtue in dishonesty, and yet that's been the practice of the Christian church. The other thing that's important to recognize is that the definition which justifies the oppression of gay and lesbian people is a definition that's no longer operative. We used to think that homosexual people choose their sexual orientation because they are either evil or morally corrupt or perhaps mentally ill. I don't know of a scientist or a doctor